Okay, this lithograph is drawn but not etched. And some of it has touche, which has a lot of texture. And touche is etched differently than pencil. It's etched with more drops of acid. And we'll just do that part, talk about mixing up acids for etching. Usually you just start with the lightest amount, like pure gum, and maybe we'll do that. We'll start with pure gum. This is gum arabic. Can you see everything well? Don't get lazy where you're pointing the wrong way.
Okay.
In the instructions, and what we're gonna do is they talk about rosin and talc. Rosin is almost like a metal. It's very strong and you don't want to breathe it. But sometimes they put rosin first to strengthen in the drawing so you don't accidentally etch it too much. But it also can rub off your drawing because it's almost like metal. So the talc makes it so the gum arabic doesn't jump back away because the drawing is greasy. It's been drawn with grease pencils, and even the touche is like a grease mixture. So the etch won't stay on top of it. The etch keeps jumping back away from it. So the talc gets on the top, and then the etch will stay on top of it because it doesn't know that it's grease because it's hiding underneath the talc. The talc is not greasy. And I'm making a pile so it gets really packed in. If I put it really thin, see, it wouldn't be the same as if I have a pile. It'll make a really white color compared to just putting a thin amount and pushing it around. So I'm pushing this pile around. And I'm not scrubbing. You don't want to like rub your drawing too hard. But especially once it's wet, we don't want, the brushes should just flow across without scrubbing. If you had an acrylic brush, you might scrub off your drawing or something, pushing too hard. So you use a soft watercolor type of brush. Gum arabic doesn't have any grease. It won't hurt your brushes. The nitric's not so great for a really expensive brush, but. Then I'm just going to save this in case we ever run out of talc. We could use the old talc. In fact, I'll move this over close to the edge of the table so I can push it into the box. Okay, so this is called a rat box, R-A-T, like a rat, because the rosin is here and the talc is here.
Okay.
In lithography, they also talk about cheesecloth that we're going to use later. Once we etch it, we have to buff the etch down into it. And this cheesecloth, if it has a long piece on it, it's called a rat tail. When you make your cheesecloth ready, you can't have rat tails. It should be a nice ball with no rat tails. So it's interesting that they have a rat box and rat tails. Maybe there was rats in the old lithography studios or something. All right, now we're going to mix our etch. You always use an ounce. Unless the stone is really big, you could use 2 ounces. But you're talking about how many drops of acid, nitric acid, per ounce.
Yeah.
It's not very strong nitric. Like once it's mixed in there, it wouldn't burn you or anything. It's not as strong as lemon juice. Oops, it's a little extra. This looks a little dark. The darker it is, the more it could be like a little strong already, just from the gum gets stronger when it sits around, when it's not new. So we know it's actually equal to like 3 drops of acid already. Gum arabic is not neutral. It's already acidic. So instead of starting at 0, you're really starting at like 3 or something. All right, that's 1 ounce. 1 ounce is probably enough. And we're not putting any drops in it yet. The very first thing we do sometimes is see how it might be hard to see what we're doing because there's all this white on it?
Yeah.
We'll just put a thin layer of gum with no acid. Again, I have to flow it on. I can't scrub it. Then we can see what we're doing better. We're going to etch a little differently than usual. Usually you start with the lightest part and keep adding drops until you get to the darkest part or until you get to the touche. So you might etch the lightest part with like 2 drops or 0 drops. In our case, we'll do 0 drops because the gum is already like 3 drops.
Okay.
So these 3 drops will be enough for this spot right here. Like now it's already etched. That part's done. But we're not worried about the pencil part because we don't have time to even finish this etch today. We're going to etch, because we only have a half an hour left. We're going to etch just our touche. And the touche is more complicated to etch because touche has a gray part in between the details. If you look closely at tush, you'll see interesting details, and it's like lines, and it's where it dried thicker, the way, like when the ocean is coming in with the tide, it leaves salt, 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 and you see lines. This leaves grease, grease, grease when it dries. But we can't have all this other grease. It'll just roll up black if we leave the grease that's in between the lines, because there's nowhere for the gum arabic to go. So we have to etch it strong enough to destroy the grease between the lines. And so we're going to be putting more drops in than we'd put for pencil. We're putting enough drops in actually to see a fizz. And a fizz is actually the stone getting chewed slightly by the etch. If it fizzes, we know it made it through the gray part, the scum. Right? So I'm going to add some drops to this. First, we'll get back to 1 ounce. Of gum arabic. Gum arabic. Well, I think you don't want it all over your hands because they put a little formaldehyde in it, like the smallest amount possible, but formaldehyde can be dangerous. So otherwise, it would be totally safe because they put it in your soda pop and stuff like that. Gum arabic pulls water toward itself. So bubble gum is almost pure gum arabic already. That's what's in it that makes it stay moist in your mouth. So this attracts water to itself and keeps it all around all the details, right? So the drops, we'll see if this is dropping well, because usually I have a bowl of water here and I'll test it off in the water. Okay, so this is actually nitric acid. I'll put a glove on. It's very hard to actually spill it on yourself, and even 1 drop, nitric acid is seeking water, seeking moisture. So it attacks your skin until it has enough moisture. So even if it got 1 drop on your finger, it would leave a little spot, but it would stop hurting. You wouldn't notice it usually. It looks like a little nicotine stain, but it's better not to. So this is a dropper bottle. It's been set a little off center, otherwise it would pour out. I just want 1 drop at a time. So you have to kind of go like this, forward, back. But I want to see if I can get 1 drop at a time. 1, 2. Okay, so now I can do drops and count them. Right. So for the tush, I'm going to start with like 15 drops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And I actually do want it to fizz lightly. Here, there. Light fizz. I'm going to just to check and see if it's going to if I didn't mix it, maybe it would be like 100 drops on the top. I need to mix it so it's 15 drops per ounce, not just all the acid floating on the top.
Yeah.
I need to check and see if it's fizzing already. To do that, I might have to push away some of this gum and just put a bunch of it here to see if I see fizzing.
Bubbles
But the bubbles may not just be those ordinary bubbles. There would be more if it was fizzing. It gets whiter looking. It might be just a very, very light fizz. So I think we can put the 2 extra drops in.
Okay.
Usually it fizzes at 17, but sometimes the drops could be bigger.
Yeah.
If there's a lot of gum, then it's like diluted, like gets to be like more gum, and then I won't be 17 per ounce. I need to see what it looks like when there's a lot. It would be the lightest fizz. We'll do it. We'll go over it one time with this really light amount, because sometimes when you see it on the tush, which is blacker, so my camera person gonna have to stop filming and start getting a little brush, because we're just gonna do the tush, so we have to go around the drawing right now.
Okay.
Now the touche might still look like it's there because touche leaves a stain, but a pencil drawing doesn't even leave a stain. In fact, it looks very light where the pencil used to be. The solvent takes out the greasy drawing, but it doesn't take out the gum arabic. So the gum arabic is still in here. We're even going to do more. When we're done, the picture will look lighter than the outside. The area where you drew will actually look lighter and lighter.
Oh, wow.
But I can't rub too hard. I don't want to scratch through the gum. That's why I want to make sure this was cotton, because I wouldn't want to scratch through the gum. You just need a little bit.
Swelton.
Probably that's more than enough. When you're inking a lithograph, we're switching to the clean sponge now. When you don't want too much water in your sponge. Usually, like, you put it like 1/4 inch or so, and then let it get in your sponge.
Okay.
And then we don't go back to the water. We can use the same water again and again. Like, the sponge will pick up the water. If I need more water, I just squeeze a little bit.
Yeah.
It has to be wet. Wet, but not dripping with extra. You keep going until you don't see any brown. You know the brown is the asphaltum, so it has to be at least thick enough to cover. And you decide how much, because sometimes you can ink it darker than you drew it, and it's still okay to do that. So, like, you can say, I want it darker, and you can keep rolling. But it's still a little tiny bit brown, so I'd have to keep going a little farther. You'd like to do it from different angles,
Okay.
especially when you're printing. Scratches look good. Like, we wanted to make sure the scratches stayed. But that's where if we lost any of the scratch areas, you can scratch some more before we second etch it. And when it's wet, it looks darker. If you want, we can let it dry out. You can have a look at it. We might put some more touche back before we second etch it.
Well.
When you're inking a lithograph, we're switching to the clean sponge now. When you don't want too much water in your sponge. Usually, like, you put it like 1/4 inch or so, and then let it get in your sponge.
Okay.
And then we don't go back to the water. We can use the same water again and again. Like, the sponge will pick up the water. If I need more water, I just squeeze a little bit.
Yeah.
It has to be wet. Wet, but not dripping with extra. You keep going until you don't see any brown. You know the brown is the asphaltum, so it has to be at least thick enough to cover. And you decide how much, because sometimes you can ink it darker than you drew it, and it's still okay to do that. So, like, you can say, I want it darker, and you can keep rolling. But it's still a little tiny bit brown, so I'd have to keep going a little farther. You'd like to do it from different angles,
Okay.
especially when you're printing. Scratches look good. Like, we wanted to make sure the scratches stayed. But that's where if we lost any of the scratch areas, you can scratch some more before we second etch it. And when it's wet, it looks darker. If you want, we can let it dry out. You can have a look at it. We might put some more touche back before we second etch it.
Well.
Some of it might come back. The harder you push on the roller, the more it can wake up what's underneath the stone.
Mm-hmm.
Like this start here and
Yeah.
stuff. But what we can also do is we won't put any etch on the background.
Yeah.
That way when we're printing, it'll start coming back a little bit
Mm-hmm.
because it won't have a stabilizing etch. It'll just continue to get darker. And I bet it would come back. So we're only going to etch the image, the drawing in the center. The touche part we're going to leave alone and just see what happens when we start printing. Oops. I think it's almost black enough. What do you think?
I think it's fine. It's black enough. It's dark enough.
Yeah, it looks black. I don't see the brown. I'll just roll it carefully to make sure I get any scum off. Maybe a different side. You try to roll from the border to the border. See where I hit the edge?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If it was a little too dark, I could do the snapping back
Oh.
thing I told you.
Yeah.
You think it's too dark?
No, I think it's good.
So if you're going to make some Western paper like Reeves and get it ready for lithography, you don't wet it by dumping it in the water. That's too much water. You spray it. You can either wet your sponge and do it with a sponge, or you spray it and then stack it together inside plastic and pull it out before each time you print. We're going to do it where we just spray it, okay?
Okay.
Did you start it? Okay. So spray it. It's got to be very even. So you spray a little farther than you would spray almost twice as big an area. Then I flip it over. And I like to spray both sides. I'll just move this over here. I like to spray both sides. Oops. And just a little bit. I should have more paper here, but all right, I'm going to do the next one. And this goes here. So in a way, I don't want to get this away, but it'll be all right. When all this paper is here, then it'll be done.
Okay.
If it was all the same size, it's a lot easier because then it's just two stacks, and the stacks get moved over. So this is easier here. I'll just do both sides. The top one, I might use the sponge, take off the extra anywhere there's a little too much water. But this is all going to go inside the plastic to keep it damp for a long time. I put a piece of mat board in here to keep it from falling down. So we'll take one out about 1 minute before we print each one. Because you don't really want to see water on it. It should just be very soft, not wet. Okay. 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 Then you can have an idea for a new drawing. That looks good, like a centipede. Scary creature.
Especially that part. Awesome. Okay. All right. All right. Let's see.
Do it from this side.
Okay.
All right, hold it up like you would it. Maybe I'll just come over top.
My
Good.
little baby.